Morning, everyone. I just wanted to give you all some general comments on Module 2, as we'll talk about a little bit later in future modules. Evaluation and reflection is a critical part of the instructional process, and this video not only helps me evaluate and reflect a little bit, but it shares my reflections and evaluations with you as well, which can also be an important step of the instruction process. So I just wanted to go through the activities that you all did in Module 2 and provide some general comments and let you know about some of the things that I'll be posting to the site in the next couple days to support your learning, and based on the comments that you gave me or based on some of the work that I saw, some additional resources that I thought might be helpful. For the first assignment in Module 2, the What's Missing activity, based on the results that came in and some of the comments that you all made, in the future for this course, I will add a comments section for this activity because I think some of you might have found that a little bit helpful to justify or explain some of your responses. And I also think that I will build up that activity a little bit more so that future students can first start by practicing identifying the different lesson parts and examples and really understanding those different parts before asking that you determine what's missing, because that was in some of your comments in your self-assessment from Module 2 as well, that you were a little unclear still on some of the different parts of a lesson. So I'll beef up that activity in the future to help other students, but I will address some of those comments a little bit later in this video. In the next assignment, the mapping your lesson, generally you all did pretty well, so you won't see very many comments on your assignments because there really wasn't a whole lot to comment on. Most of you did a great job on identifying the parts of a lesson that you've already integrated into your lesson plan or your outline, and also you did a great job identifying what's missing. So for the most part, you won't see a whole lot of comments there because you did pretty well. But there were some general things that I saw in commonalities across multiple assignments. And one of that was the evaluation and reflection. And remember that that should include both your evaluation and reflection as well as the students. Student evaluations of the teaching are good too, but it's actually just as important, if not more important, for you to have your own time to reflect. You'll learn more from what the students learned through the assessments of their learning, and then the evals for the students become less prominent, but your personal reflection and debriefing should be part of your lesson plan as well. So a lot of you had evaluation coming from the students, but you were still missing that reflection, that self-reflection piece. So when you're building your templates, make sure that you put that in there as well. Those of you that have not submitted that assignment yet, please do still submit it. And for everybody, make sure that when you're done and when you're submitting an assignment, you actually submit it. Many of you just had drafts, so it seemed like you hadn't submitted the activity, but you thought you had, but it was just seen as a draft. So I tried to pull out the assignments that were just drafts rather than fully submitted, and I did give a grade to those. So if you received a grade, you don't have to worry about it. I got it. I reviewed your assignment. But if you think you submitted it and you have not yet received a grade, please go back and try to submit again to make sure that it does get submitted. So for your future assignments, make sure that it does fully go through, it's fully submitted. That way I know that you've completed it and it's ready for me to grade. And one other thing about mapping your lesson is that many of you identified objectives in your current lesson plans. However, most of what you identified wasn't really an objective, and you don't need to worry about that right now. We're going to go much more deeply into objectives in Module 4. But a good kind of intro to this is that topics are not objectives, and that's mostly what was being identified as an objective. So something like how to access web resources or accessing the library catalog. Those are topics, not learning objectives. So just keep that in mind as you start Module 4, the difference between topics and objectives as well as outcomes. We'll discuss a little bit about that as well. And then that last assignment, the choosing topics assignment, I was interested to see that most of you range from about 45 to 50 minutes, which is great that we're getting a good amount of time for our one-shot sessions. And I noticed that we're almost all face-to-face. And there's also a pretty good mix of new lessons and revisions. And I really didn't see any red flags there, so we will keep moving forward with those topics throughout the course. Then I took a look at the self-assessment that you all completed, and I wanted to address some of the comments or questions or concerns that were raised there. One thing that was brought up was the difference between materials and content. And so I wanted to try to explain that a little bit. So, content is the actual content that you are creating, and that usually comes out in some kind of outline form. The content should be created first in an outline or maybe a script if you're more comfortable with a script. And then you take that content and transform it into a usable material like slides, handouts, worksheets, videos, etc. So the content creation should always come first. Write it out, type it out, draw it out or storyboard it, however you do that, and then you take that and you put it into whatever medium is most or is best suited for that content. So it could be a slideshow, it could be a handout, it could be a video. It depends on the content. We're not going to get too much into content and material development in this course because this is intro to lesson planning, so we're just kind of going over the basics really quickly. But if that is something you're interested in, I'm happy to talk through some of that with you a little bit later. I will put up some links in the resources wiki on creating effective handouts and infographics, so you do have some tools that can help you a little bit with that, but we're not going to go into too deep of a discussion there. Another question that came up a few times was hooking. And hooking should be a way for you to grab their students' attention. And in that lesson plan mapping activity, some of you identified hooks that I wouldn't really consider to be a hook. It should be an icebreaker or a do now activity or a discussion, anything that gets students doing something and engaged right off the bat. So if the students are not engaged in it, it's not a hook. It's just an introduction. So I'm also going to post a link to some slides on hooking that can give you some more information, as well as some slides on engagement and what engagement looks like. I also saw some questions about assessments, and we'll talk a little bit more about those in modules 4 through 5, but we're not going to go too deeply into assessment because we could do an entire 6-week course on assessment. And again, this is just intro to lesson planning, so we're going to focus on kind of the structure of a lesson plan and what a lesson plan should look like. And all of those pieces that go into a lesson plan, those are things that we can do later, or we don't really have the time to go too deeply into a lot of those things. But those are all things that I do teach on. So if you do have particular questions about those things, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to work through any of that with you. And then a question that came up was, do we need to write down the reflection after the lesson? Yes, absolutely. You should always write down your reflection or write down some notes. It doesn't have to be an essay, but some notes that will help you remember, because otherwise how are you going to remember what you need to do the next time? So write it down somehow. That's why it should be a part of the lesson plan, so that it is there on paper. You can refer back to it later. And then a question about how to handle the micro versus macro in the one shot. I'm going to create a discussion board for that, and I'd like you all to discuss that together. How do you get at that immediate need that students need, but also helping them see the bigger picture? That can be really difficult in the one shot. That is one of my biggest pet peeves about this whole one shot model that we're in. So I'm going to pose a question in the discussion board, and I'd like you guys to respond to that there. And then the last question that I wanted to address was the idea of differentiation. And again, that is way more advanced than intro to lesson planning. So I'm glad that you all are asking some of these questions about going more deeply into assessments and differentiation, but those aren't topics that we're really going to go into in this particular course. But I'm happy to talk to you about those and push you some resources offline. So again, feel free to email me, contact me through the Moodle site, however you'd like, and happy to answer those questions. So I think that about wraps up Module 2. By now, you should be working on Module 3. I recommend that you complete those first couple activities for Module 3 by the end of the day today. That way you have the rest of the week to work on your lesson planning template and getting that in by Sunday. I know a lot of people don't work on the weekends. I don't work on the weekends, but you have until Sunday if that is how you like to do your work. And I look forward to reading your responses in the discussion board and seeing how you do on all the activities. And I'm also looking forward to see those lesson planning templates. So have a good week, and if you have questions, reach out, and I will talk to you all soon.